I'm the celiac bootlegger and I'm finding ways to enjoy alcohol without the stomach ache. Today we're going to be talking about rums as an alternative to whiskey. And you may be thinking, what? Rum? That clear bottle of Bacardi or the sickly sweet Captain Morgan that you vaguely remember puking up into a dorm room trash can after drink and drown at the club? No, not those kind of rums. We're specifically going to be looking at aged rums. And I'm going to argue that aged rums are a great alternative to whiskey and actually sometimes superior to their American bourbon counterparts. A properly aged rum can be enjoyed neat, with no mixer, no ice, just like the most prized American bourbons. Or it can also substitute for whiskey in cocktails such as a Manhattan or a whiskey sour. Bourbon is the quintessential American spirit. On your next visit to the liquor store, you'll see what I mean if you take a look at the size of their whiskey selection versus their selection of basically any other liquor. There's a lot more shelf space dedicated to whiskey. Bars in other countries, they'll usually keep a bottle of Jack Daniels on the top shelf because that's what people in other countries want to drink when they want to feel American. Whiskey is exotic to them, just like in America we see maybe tequila or rum as exotic. Whiskey's domestic popularity is probably due to the fact that it's really the only liquor that Americans can lay claim to. In the popular imagination, vodka originates in Russia and Eastern Europe, gin is thoroughly British, rum comes from the Caribbean islands and so forth. But whiskey, specifically bourbon, is quintessentially American because of its use of corn, which is native to America. As celiacs, though, we should be avoiding spirits distilled from grains containing gluten, and that eliminates whiskey from our liquor cabinet. Some people claim that the distilling process of whiskey eliminates the gluten parts per million down to so low that it is practically gluten-free. The science on that, again, is dubious. I occasionally consume bourbon myself. I've mostly stopped. I don't have serious immediate celiac symptoms such as vomiting when I drink it, but I have noticed things like long-term digestive effects, so I mostly avoid it, and we're going to talk about what you can do to replace that. So let's think about the characteristics of whiskey, and that will help guide this discussion. Whiskey is a dark liquor. Its golden appearance comes from an aging process in wooden barrels. Without aging in those barrels, whiskey is essentially clear. As it ages, whiskey takes on color from the wooden barrels. Whiskey, specifically bourbon, has a distinct sweetness, and that sweetness comes from corn. To be sold as bourbon in America, a whiskey has to be distilled from 51% corn, and the other 49% is usually made up of gluten-containing grains, such as barley. The taste on the tongue of bourbon is sweeter than, say, Scotch whiskey, which is more savory and prized for its complex and smoky flavor. Though Scotch and bourbon are both whiskeys, they taste extremely different. That being said, the sweetness alone is not what defines bourbon. The most popular bourbons usually find a way to pair the sweetness of the corn with an alcohol sensation that's warm and mellow, but it'll burn just a little bit. And that warmth will linger on the back of your throat in a way that a lot of people find more comforting than, say, the burn of a vodka. So those traits that I just named, the darkness in color, the aging process, and the distinct sweetness balanced with the signature burn, these characteristics can all also be found in rum, the best part being that rum is distilled from molasses and sugarcane, both of which are naturally gluten-free in their pure form. Some flavored rums, of course, will sometimes have other things added to them that may contain gluten. A lot of people never consider drinking rum straight. Bartenders sometimes have second-guessed me when I order a rum neat at the bar. The most popular way to consume rum is with mixers. Coca-Cola for a classic rum and Coke, or more recently the mojito, which is probably the other most popular rum drink in America. After years of exploring rum options, I've come to the conclusion that most Americans only consider drinking rum with mixers because we are used to drinking trash rum. Captain Morgan spice, the flavored stuff from Bacardi, it all gets dumped into a syrupy sweet mixer that masks the taste of that cheap, bad booze we're drinking. but there's actually rich traditions of finely aged spirits, of finely aged rums in the Caribbean islands in Central and South America. And these rums are prized and enjoyed by people all over the world, just like we prize and enjoy our bourbon here. So next week we'll be tasting a few more varieties, but this week I was just going to feature one that I really like. This is Ron Abuelo Anejo. Abuelo means grandpa in Spanish, so it's kind of a funny name. This is the brand's cheapest bottle. It's very affordable. This usually runs about $15 to $18 for the 750 milliliter. And it's pretty widely available around town, but you have to look for it. Sometimes it's on the bottom shelf, sometimes it's on the top shelf or in a weird corner. Abuelo is made in Panama, and it's pretty unique as far as rums go in that it is produced entirely at a single location, meaning that there's a plantation-style property where they grow sugarcane, turn that into molasses, then turn it into rum on the same property, and then age it on-site in barrels. And that's really uncommon in the modern economy, and I'm sure it's part of what contributes to this good flavor for a good price is just having the ingredients exposed to pretty much the same climate throughout their entire process. You don't see that a lot with a lot of these really big companies out there. This is a blend of a few different ages of rum. If I had to guess, this would be probably has nothing older than 3 years in it. Abuelo does sell a few higher priced bottles. The top of the line is interestingly actually aged in Jack Daniel's barrels bought from the producer of Jack Daniel's whiskey. So that would be a really interesting one to try. I haven't been able to find in my area. But we'll go ahead and give this a little go. See the color there. It's basically indistinguishable from most whiskeys. It's light amber, dark gold. The first thing I notice is that it's got a really nice, clean burn. We talked about that sensation of kind of lingering warmth that's really common to whiskey, and how it's kind of more comforting and mellow than, say, the burn of a bottom shelf rum or a bottom shelf vodka or something like that. It definitely has an incredibly similar burn to bourbon that I haven't really been able to find in anything else except for these aged rums. The color is really similar too, and it has kind of an oakiness on the mouthfeel. I can't believe I just said oakiness on the mouthfeel, but there's really no better way to explain it. Because one of the signature elements of bourbon is being aged in those oak barrels, and this is actually also aged in oak by the Abuelo company in small oak casks, and I'm sure sitting in that medium of charred oak, just like bourbon does, probably does a lot to the flavor profile. It would be really interesting to try an unaged whiskey, that was clear and not aged versus an unaged rum. I wonder if we could really be able to tell the difference. This isn't mind-blowing, but it's a really good substitute, especially if you're celiac. It does a lot of the same things that you want bourbon to do. I'm not going to call it mind-blowing. It's really good, though. It does the job right. It tastes like your bottom mid-shelf bottles of bourbon, such as a Jim Beam or the basic Wild Turkey. And if you're celiac, that's great. So as we wrap up, here's some quick rules of thumb when shopping for rums to replace whiskey in cocktails or to drink neat. Aged rums are what you typically want. The aging gives it that more complex flavor. These rums are typically gold in color instead of clear or black. The bottle will usually say that it is aged and give you a year number. Sometimes it might say añejo, which translates to vintage in Spanish, and that also means aged. Number 2 is don't be fooled by blends. If a bottle boasts a high age range, but it says it is a blend of a couple different batches, then it is probably mostly really young stuff with just a drop of an older batch so that they can charge more and boast that higher age number of aged up to 7 years or what have you. That doesn't mean that that rum can't be good, just don't be tricked into overpaying for a bottle because we are celiacs, not suckers. And lastly, a good rule of thumb when buying rum to sip neat or for cocktails is to avoid rums with palm trees, umbrellas, sunsets, and swimsuits on the bottle. Those aren't necessarily signs of a bad rum, but it is usually a sign that it is meant to be dumped into a very sweet mixer to hide the taste. For these sipping rums, you want to look for a bottle that looks more neutral. It'll typically just be kind of plain and homely, more of what you would think of when you would buy a whiskey bottle. So that's a good rule of thumb to go by. And we'll be back again soon with more gluten-free bootlegger content. Just a reminder that alcohol is an addictive, mind-altering substance. It ruins friendships, it can ruin families, your body if you're not careful, so please be self-aware of your own drinking habits. If you like my vlog, I also write other stuff, which you can find under the name NASCAR Noir at nascarnoir.com. I've got zines, stories, interviews with people I think are cool, as well as a band that goes by NASCAR Noir, and that's our intro and outro music, which you heard, available on Spotify and Bandcamp at nascarnoir.bandcamp.com. And we'll see you again next week.